Okay, so we are now recording.
Excellent.
Let us begin with The Watermelon Woman.
Okay.
So this came out in 1994, I'm going to say. It's by Cheryl Dunye. Not sure if that's the right way to pronounce that. It's about a Black woman who works at a video store, and she sort of humorously calls herself a filmmaker at the start, but does eventually start making a documentary about a actress she sees in a movie, and this is a fake actress, it's not a real one, called The Watermelon Woman, and starts to dive into the history of this actress. And there's complications when our filmmaker gets a girlfriend, and then her friend is kind of, there's awkwardness there. It's like a little bit of a social drama, but like it's pretty casual, and there's a fair bit of humor and stuff like that. This is one of the movies that the Criterion has been highlighting on their featured band as a part of all the sort of Black filmmakers and Black protagonists thing. Just sort of that's like the whole featured carousel right now. And but I'd actually heard about it in a video essay like a month ago or something. I cannot for the life of me remember what the video essay was about, but it was a recommendation from that group. And yeah, I really like this.
I do too. I think one of the interesting things that you missed out on when you posted about it, and it's from 96. I looked 96. It up. It's very 90s, and the reason you don't notice that as much is because you were younger in the 90s.
I was 6 in 1996.
There's something very 90s about it in a delightful kind of a way. I think part of it is the video store location, which we had video stores for at least another 10 years, but I feel like there was a certain emphasis on video stores or, video rental places in the 90s. The visual aesthetics, the brightness. I have to imagine that in the 90s, video cameras were becoming cheaper. So it feels like you just saw more video in general.
Yeah.
And so I like those aspects, and I like the mixed reality memoir where it's Cheryl Dunye, who is
the main character, who's also named Cheryl, I think.
Who's named Cheryl, who is a lesbian, as she is in the movie, who I think really was doing the movie as part of a student project or a university project or something. I know she got a grant for it, so maybe it wasn't connected.
Yeah, I actually read that on Wikipedia, and and there's a sex scene. Spoilers for The Watermelon, with The Watermelon Woman. There's a sex scene in it, and apparently the place that gave Cheryl Dunye the grant, this is just Wikipedia. Don't know any of the details for this, but like the place that gave her the grant changed the rules afterwards because they were unhappy that they gave a grant to somebody who then had a sex scene in their movie because they were like, it's porno. And it's like,
so stupid.
So it's stupid.
Dumb. It's dumb. But anyway, so I really like that. And there's something about like in the 90s, like the real world was becoming a thing.
Right.
And the other thing about, I've been thinking about this I'm going to take a slightly off topic, but I'll get back there. Something I've been thinking about is I grew up watching The Cosby Show, A Different World. I didn't watch it a ton, but I did watch some of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and In Living Color, I think was the other one's name. And now these were all sitcoms, basically, that featured, no, not In Living Color, that's a skit comedy. It was the one that had Queen Latifah in it. I'll look it up when you take over. But these were all basically sitcoms that featured African Americans. And I'm sure there's critiques to be made of like how much the Cosby Show represented the average anyone's average life, frankly, but definitely not Black Americans' lives. But there was also something where race was an issue within these shows because they featured African Americans and Black people. but it wasn't the entirety of the narrative.
Yeah.
And I don't remember there being sitcoms later, as many sitcoms about that featured Black casts. I think there have been some that maybe featured Spanish casts.
Well, I mean, nowadays there's definitely sitcoms that range there. I mean, there's Blackish, which I've never watched, but
right, and
Modern
Atlanta,
Family, and
Atlanta.
Atlanta. I was trying to do Atlantic, which is something different.
That's a movie.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this actually. While you look what you want to look up, I have two thoughts. One is video stores are really a thing of my childhood because they were really only around in the 90s and the early part of the 2000s. By the time I was graduating from high school, I don't even remember video stores being around that much because by then I was getting all my stuff from Netflix when they used to do DVD rentals before they could stream. Like it was, I watched the entirety of like Stargate that way. And so I remember, so it was really only a 10 or 15, like in my mind, it's this really big part of culture, but in truth, it didn't even make it 2 decades.
Yeah.
I mean, streaming's only been around for a decade and a half. So at this point,
we were renting videos in the 80s. So 80s to 90s, 90s.
So maybe 2 decades, like it was 2 decades, but like, that's a pretty short amount of time. And the second thing is I remember as a kid, watching Disney Channel shows. I was never into sitcoms the way that I think you might have been when you were younger. Because by the time I was a teenager, it was like sci-fi shows and movies. Like I wasn't doing a ton of...
television was different when I was young than when you were, like we had Nickelodeon, but the Disney Channel wasn't a thing.
I was watching a lot of like bootleg anime as a kid, and like
I was born with MTV. It kind of, and MTV looked different when I was a kid. So
yeah. But I do remember one specific show. I think it was called Smart Kid or something. It's one of the only Disney shows that's really stuck with me. Taj Mori or something is a name that's coming to mind. I may be getting the name wrong, but it was like this. It was a show on the Disney Channel when I was a kid, and the main cast was a Black family, and like it was about Black issues, but it was also just about the family. And like that was a show that I remember really liking. I have no idea how good of representation it was. It has been. I haven't thought of it since then, but But
it's interesting. You've come up with one name, and so the TV show I was talking about that had Queen Latifah in it was Living Single, which Wikipedia describes as 6 Black 20-somethings, 4 women and 2 men, share their lives and loves in a Brooklyn brownstone. So mind you, I may have watched more of these kind of shows than you, but I definitely totally watched The Cosby Show. I was very into A Different World. I watched Living Single, and I watched some, but not very much, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Sorry, that was the other one. I watched some of that because that was actually, I think, slightly more my generation, or maybe it was just the reruns, but I watched some of that too.
But I don't know that, I'm curious. To me, it felt like... there was less of those shows.
Like they dropped off at a certain point.
But I don't know if I just wasn't watching as many.
I know that there were some shows, like I have this memory of I think it was another, I don't know if it was the whole cast was Black, but it was like, I remember this, like, it's like a brick building. And I remember this guy and this girl walking into this apartment. Like this must be a sitcom or something from when I was younger. But yeah,
that could be Living Single. I mean,
could be, but
anyway. So I've been thinking about that, and there's definitely in these Criterion Collection movies that we've been watching, there's been those kind of movies where it's very important that she's Black, and a lot of it is about the erasure of history. You have these Black people who acted in movies whose names weren't even in the credits.
Yeah.
And that's all very important, but it's also about a woman who's
single and
she has friends and she wants to date, and race is an issue because she dates a white woman who's well-intentioned but clueless as far as we can tell.
Yeah, that peters out in a way where I think like it kind of makes sense, because I think the point is that the character is just a little oblivious. And
I do think that's something, because and I'm going to go off. I'm a little scattered today, I feel like, but
It's all
we
good.
have movies like 12 Years a Slave, and I personally have trouble watching movies about slavery, about war, about the Holocaust, just to like make it broader. But, a movie about a human being, who's going through life, like those movies interest me. And
Yeah.
there's that problem where if it's going to be anyone of color, there has to be a reason, because it's
Yeah.
like the default is white. So, it just makes me think about like, you haven't watched Losing Ground yet, which
No.
I liked a lot. It's about a married couple. They're Black, and that factors into their lives. But it's also just about a married couple.
One of the things I like about The Watermelon Woman that I think you're getting at is that it's about these complicated things, historical erasure, and sort of our main character wants to belong. And in a weird way, I empathize with that. Well, I empathize with it just in general, but I also personally empathize with that because we're European mutts. We obviously have heritage, but we couldn't, I don't, we're as, it's lost. Like our heritage is effectively just lost and in the ether. And mom occasionally talks about it, and we're descended
Yeah.
from, it's like,
It's not lost the way heritage is lost.
it's not lost the same way. I was going to clarify that too, because it's not lost the same way, but it's not the same experience, but there is parallels, or at least something similar in that. So when I watch these movies, like this movie, The Watermelon Woman, where this woman is effectively creating, well, she's discovering a history, and at the end of the movie, Cheryl Dunye leaves in a quote where it's like, we have to create our own history in some cases. And it's like, I almost empathize with that because I feel like I have to do that sometimes. Not in the same way, obviously. I'm not Black.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's completely different in that regard. But like, I can understand that because I don't really have any cultural connections. And I sometimes, just when I'm daydreaming, make up, connections. There's not a strong lineage there. So I sort of get that, but that's a complicated thing, right? And it's erasure in the wanting to belong. And yet there's a lot of jokes in it. There's a ton of humor in it.
Right. It's
Poignant,
very,
but it's humorful.
Yes, it's very, yes, I agree. And I think what you're talking about too, there was a lot of erasure of just every culture. And I'm not going to do like a, what is it? I'm not going to try and.
It's not a tiered system.
Yeah. But I mean, what is it? Is it James Garfield? Like that was not, he's Jewish. His last name's not Garfield. Like there's a lot of Rita Hayworth, like she has Latin American or possibly European Spanish, but I think she's South American, Central American heritage. I can't
remember, yeah.
Yeah, and so, they gave her a more white-sounding name. So you find a lot of that for anyone who's not white, but then, to have Black actors whose names weren't even listed. Yeah. And I think part of what was really interesting to me was the kind of conclusion she had, which in a way was like, just make your own, make the story up, because it's all made up a little bit. Like, the history, the white history is it, what is it? The winners always make the histories kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, but yeah, there's also, there's an ironic kind of a humor to it that I enjoyed.
There's an ironic humor to it. It's like there's two aspects to it. There's this ironic humor, like our main character is given a double date by her friend, or is taken on a double date by her friend, and our main character just is not into this other woman. This other woman is Black, just isn't into her. But then she meets this white woman, and she thinks she's attractive, and they kind of vibe on kind of an intellectual level. There's something going on there. It's not the deepest exploration of a relationship or anything. And there's some sort of kind of ironic humor there. There's some sort of a kind of off-kilter, there's some kind of humor there. But it also, because of how it's treating these things, it comes off as not being pretentious to me. Like, right. In like, we might talk about Ganja and Hess later, which is a movie that could arguably be called pretentious. I feel like this movie is specifically trying not to be. Like, there's jokes. One of the jokes is that they cheat the video store on rentals by renting videos under, like, special order videos under somebody's name. And one of the and they're both lesbians, the two women, but one of them is ordered like ball droppings or ball something. And it's like, and
It sounds like a porno is the point.
It's a porno, but it's like with specifics on balls or something. And the character of Cheryl is like, why are you getting this? And Tamara's like, I'm just curious. I want to know. And it's like, there's just something so funny about that. So that was one of my favorite parts.
Well, doesn't it hit on the universality through specificity kind of a thing
it's that
too?
kind of thing, yeah.
Which I think is a little bit what I was getting at too. Like, a black character is not something that interests me any more than a woman character does. But like, a woman who is black and she's lesbian and she's looking for love and she's also trying to find I can get into that.
You don't want the stereotype. You want you want a person, not a stereotype.
Not even the stereotype. It's more like not like a single description.
Not an archetype. It's like or maybe you don't want an archetype too.
But there's nothing there. It's like the marketing that's like, you should like this because, it stars a woman. And it's like, well...
You gotta like Wonder Woman, Sarah.
And it's like, but I don't have that much, like, I need more than just the fact that we are both women to tie me into, I have had amazingly, my favorite author writes about lonely, depressed Japanese men, and I really can get into their heads. It's not about just that. Like,
right. Yeah.
So give us more than that. And anyway, I feel like I'm all over the place, but
you are, but that's okay. That's what this is for. The Watermelon Woman is specific in that way, though, where
right.
I like my Pixar and my cheesy action movies and stuff, and most of the time the characters aren't as fleshed out in those movies. And so it's less that I identify with them, but I'm there for like a story and a pacing, whereas The Watermelon Woman is a character-driven story.
Right.
And I really enjoy, like, I want Cheryl, it's by the end of it, I want Cheryl to be my friend, it's like, I want to know this person, she's interesting, she's trying to be a filmmaker, she's kind of arrogant in a way that's funny, but not like completely, she's just kind of like trying to push her way through things, and there's lots of things there, so... The Watermelon Woman is very good.
Well, and it was interesting. I had just watched Losing Ground and Cane River from that collection, and they're both early 80s. So it was interesting also to go from like these early 80s aesthetics to mid 90s. And it's just fun to see those different time periods. And I was talking about the video camera, but there is video and film in it, and I like the juxtaposition and I like just her and her friend like dancing. Like there was something very like 90s MTV about that scene. They're just like out there dancing. It's like we could have been doing, what is it, Spring Break with Bill Bellamy and Eric Mees or whatever, those guys. You remember those MTV shows where it would just be like people dancing around a pool?
Oh, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't as much MTV as you.
So it's like a great taste, it's a great memories of a certain time, but then with a specific main character that I wouldn't have known at that time, in part because I was like 11, but I think I mean I've loved all these films that we've seen on Criterion so far.